Let's take a look at the big new heavy tank on the block, with a review of the full rules for the Rogal Dorn, the mighty new battle tank for the Imperial Guard. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking the new Astra Militarum, and I thought we'd start off with a focused look at the datasheet for the Rogal Dorn battle tank, the much rumoured and teased guard heavy armour that looks like it's going to be a direct contender against the Leman Russ. In the video we'll take a look over its full rules and stat lines for the 9th edition Codex Astra Militarum, talk about weapon choices between its turret guns and hull mounted options, any obvious buffs and synergies that can be used in it in Codex Astra Militarum, a little bit of math hammer compared with the Leman Russ, and overall how good it's looking in game at the moment. Loads to talk about, so let's jump straight in. So first up, it does seem that the Rogal Dorn battle tank is a heavy support choice for 250 points base. That includes its whole weapons, as it does look that you just field individual ones of them, you can't field squadrons like you can with Leman Russes. In terms of keywords, it's got the vehicle keyword. It's a battle tank which allows you certain synergies in the codex with things like stratagems and stuff. It has the regimental keyword, so it gets the regimental doctrines, and it has the squadron keyword as well, which doesn't actually mean that you can field it in a squadron, but this is the thing that allows you to get tank orders on it, and it can take those just as easily as a standard Leman Russ can, so it's quite a good big platform to order. Statline wise, for those 250 points, it is rather mighty. It's got a 10-inch move, weapon skill 6+, a ballistic skill of 4+, though the turret weapon hits on 3s, strength 8 and toughness 9, a big 17 wounds, 6 attacks, leadership 8, and a 2+ save. This thing looks massively hard to take out with a big toughness 9. You'll be shrugging off things like melter guns, Eldar lancers and missile launchers without too much difficulty. 17 wounds at 2+ save is no joke even at 250 points, and currently, at least until Games Workshop updates the balanced data slate, it still has Armour of Contempt as well, though we'll have to see whether or not they update that positively or negatively for it. Armour of Contempt isn't in the Guard Codex. Whether it stays or not will depend on the next version of the balanced data slate once the Codex is officially out. The main gun gets you the turret weapon special rule, which gives you a +1 to hit and also allows you to fire out of combat, albeit at a -1 to hit penalty if you do so, but really quite nice insurance against getting locked up there. The two profiles for the main cannon are either the oppressor cannon and the coaxial autocannon and the twin battle cannon. The oppressor cannon is basically a really big battle cannon, heavy d6 shots +3, strength 10, AP -3, and a big flat damage 4 and blast. That one also comes with the coaxial autocannon for free, though you can swap it out for a twin battle cannon, which does have a fairly curious profile. It gets 2d6 shots at strength 8, AP -3, damage 3, and blast again. It is just kind of weird, as it just doesn't really look anything like double the profile of a standard battle cannon on a Leman Russ tank. It is the one that's rumoured, it just gets more AP and more random shots, but it doesn't really get significantly higher than the oppressor cannon, which is weird, as the oppressor cannon basically just has better stats. For the whole weapon, you can choose freely either between the pulverizer cannon at 24 inches, heavy d6, strength 8, AP -2, and damage 3. That one's basically got the new battle cannon stats, but at a demolisher cannon's range. You could see it as a short range battle cannon or a small demolisher cannon, depending on how you want to look at it. And you can swap that out for the castigated Gatling cannon if you need some anti-horde duty taken care of. 24 inches, 12 shots at strength 6, AP 1, and damage 1. We'll compare the damage profiles between those and the main gun in just a second. The sponsons on this thing do look really quite cheap. Heavy bolter sponsons appear to be only 5 points in the new book, so I think that usually swings them from being something that's a bit maybe to something that you just usually want to take now. And alternatively, you can upgrade to the more expensive multi-melters at 15 points each, but that too is also a bit cheaper than the previous codex. Otherwise, it does get that fun top-mounted heavy stubber for free, the one where the guy has to stand outside the tank, and I suspect is one of the last jobs that you want to volunteer for in the tank corps. And then you've got the option of those front-mounted swivel guns, either melter guns or heavy stubbers. Again, they're +5 points each, regardless of which one you choose. Again, 5 points for a bolt-on heavy stubber really doesn't seem too bad, and if you're thinking about playing aggressive with a tank, the melter guns might be the better option, I suppose. Finally, for options, it can take armoured tracks for +5 points to give you a +1 to save against damage 1 weapons, and it also gives you the armoured keyword. Maybe that's just a bit take or leave for me. On a 2+ armor save, it's going to make it even more invulnerable to small arms. But still, besides against, say, a few niche factions like Thousand Suns Inferno combi bolters, this thing's generally not going to be fearing damage 1 attacks all that much. Overall, it's a big chunky tank with a decent defensive stat line, a whole bunch of different guns, and a particularly fearsome turret weapon that hits on 3s that is still going to be able to put in decent work even if they tag it in combat with something light. First up, I thought it could be interesting to compare the stats on the Oppressor Cannon and that Twin Battle Cannon, and I must admit, it does look like Games Workshop haven't balanced these particularly nicely. There just don't really seem to be that many cases that you wouldn't just take the Oppressor Cannon, as that one comes with a Twin Auto Cannon, and if you combine the profiles, they basically seem to outcompete the Twin Battle Cannon on just about any profile. The two combined are slightly better at killing Guardsmen or Space Marines. They're basically the same against Terminators, and then again the Oppressor Cannon and Autocannon combo wins out against anything heavy, particularly if it's got damage -1. I don't know if there are many other marginal use cases that the Twin Battle Cannon could be better in. I guess maybe theoretically if you're targeting units with 11+ models, or you use that tank order to count a target as double the amount of units, and again that hits the 11+. I guess if you're getting 12 shots out of it, that is going to outcompete the Oppressor, even if that gets a max 8. Realistically though, at least by these rules, the Oppressor Cannon and Autocannon just look superior. I would take those on the turret. Next up, we've got the Pulverizer versus the Gatling Cannon. The two hull-mounted weapons, really quite different weapons with different target profiles, and their damage is as you'd expect. The Gatling Cannon's far better against Guardsmen, and the Pulverizer Cannon against anything heavy. Against mid-sized targets like Space Marines, they're around about even, the extra shots versus the extra damage. Overall, I think that these two are pretty balanced. I think it maybe more depends on exactly what sort of targets you expect to play against more than anything else. I feel like maybe out of damage profiles, I slightly prefer the Pulverizer, as it's generally going to be a threat to just about everything. But the Gatling Cannon certainly has its merits. You are going to stack some saves, and it can actually fire in melee as well as a bit of point defense, where the Pulverizer wouldn't be able to because it's blast and isn't a turret weapon. Next up, let's talk about a fair few of the various different buffs and synergies that you can put on the Rogal Dorn tank within the Astra Militarum Codex. Out of regimental traits, these are the ones that I think are maybe the most interesting on them. Born Soldiers allows you to auto wounds on 6s for a flat damage boost, plus unlocks a decent stratagem. Maybe a bit more important for things like spam las guns though. Most of the guns on this do have okay strength at least. The plus 4-inch range one is pretty handy on things like multi-melters or the hull mounted guns. Having those guns go out to 28 inches would genuinely be a bit more useful. Armoured superiority can help you out on objectives a bit. The battle tanks count as 5 models on objectives. Certainly wouldn't hurt, and there is a tank order that can grant OBSEC if desired. The regimental doctrine for reroll 1 hit per unit isn't bad. Maybe not super strong, but not bad at all on the Oppressor Cannon. And Trophy Hunter can give you +1 strength versus monsters and vehicles, but just doesn't really seem particularly usable to me because that takes up 2 selections rather than 1, while only being relevant against certain matchups. I think if you're running one of these, ideally you would want tank orders on the board in some form. You can get reroll 1s to hit with one of them. That's going to be pretty nice just to amp up damage. There's one to help out blast weapons, which could maybe tip the balance to units on 11 models. Fairly situational, I think, but if you are about to open up with the Oppressor Cannon and Pulverizer Cannon against, say, a unit of 6 models, then that would actually be a massive damage increase. It'd beat the rerolls to hit in that situation, even if you had a couple of other guns, I think. Otherwise, as mentioned, you could elect to make it OBSEC, use pinning fire to hand out -2-inch movement to infantry. That's one way you have to focus all your fire on one unit and get 5 hits. And full throttle can give it an extra 2-inch movement and also advance and shoot. That could be nice if you really need line of sight on something and you can't quite get there otherwise. I feel like reroll 1s to hit is probably going to be the go-to, to be honest, though the flexibility of having the rest on offer is pretty useful situationally. You can upgrade Rogal Dorn tanks to tank aces as well, and I feel like compared with the Leman Russes, they're perhaps more tempting to do so. You pay the same amount of points for Leman Russes and Rogal Dorns to be upgraded to aces, and on a bigger tank with more guns and more defense, you are going to get more out of them here. The one to make a Dawn into a tank commander for getting a tank order is pretty nice at 15 points. I believe that currently rules as written that it actually allow it to order itself, which might or might not be intended, as most of the tank commanders can't at the moment. You can get Ignored cover for 20 points, not too bad when you're buffing 250 points or more worth of guns. That seems pretty usable to me. You can pick up an extra regimental doctrine for 20 points. I'm not quite as convinced about that one being particularly worth it. Master of Camouflage can give you light cover at greater than 12 inches for 25. If you've just got one of these sitting in the back of your army, then this is going to make it even more of a nightmare to gun down. I guess it possibly might be slightly overkill on the durability front though. And you can get a 5+ save against mortal wounds with Knight of Piety. That's 25 points, and it also gives you a 5+ invul. Not bad, but I'm not sure it's quite worth the extra points on that one unless you're playing it really aggressively and you want it extra protected at the front. Out of the tank cases, I think I'd be most tempted by the tank order or the ignores cover one. Both of those seem pretty cheap and very usable. Moving on, we've got stratagems and characters. Going through the buffs available from the New Guard Codex, you can get smoke launchers for a -1 to hit, handy enough, particularly if you're being hit by something that's ballistic skill 4+ or worse. Ablasive plating can give you a -1 damage for 3 CP, very pricey to be honest, maybe could be okay if you're just about to get massively focused by loads of damage 2 shots. Relentless can make it fight on full profile, quite nice to have access to that given it's a quite big and high investment tank. You don't ideally want it hitting on 5s and 6s. Vengeful Salute is a fun one that I really quite like from the new book. It allows you to fire a turret weapon on death at ballistic skill 5+. So basically as you go down, you can fire up that oppressor cannon one last time, potentially average another 6 or 7 shots on the enemy, and I think it will be hitting on a 4+, as it still would get the turret weapon rule for that. That seems worth it for the damage alone if you do have one of these destroyed. Never mind the fact that you might actually be able to kill something absolutely key in the enemy turn, and maybe destroy something before it gets to shoot or it just got to charge. Crush them is a situational one to use in melee. If you find your tank there, you can get weapon skill 4+ and 6 sister wounds to do an additional mortal wound. It's not going to make it into a combat powerhouse, but you might be road killing a few light infantry with that. Born Soldiers gives you access to a stratagem that amps up the damage even more. Usually it's auto wounds on 6s. You can have this guy auto wounding on 5s for 1 CP. That's really quite big. Bypassing the wound roll is no bad thing with transhuman physiology on quite a lot of units. Finally, overlapping fields of fire can be used by anyone, not just Cadians now. This one triggers when you kill a model in an enemy unit now, so it's good for killing squads and things. Then the rest of the army gets to reroll 1s to wound and an extra pip of AP on 6s. Not a super strong damage buff, but if you got to apply it to multiple different units, it could stack up to be worth it. Say if you're trying to focus down something big like an enemy knight. Overall, I'd say it's fairly good stratagem support. There's a fair few decent staple ones there in my opinion. Perhaps Smoke Launchless, Relentless, and Vengeful Salute. All of those do seem like quite easy ones to use for some direct results. Otherwise, for other characters, targeting him with Lord Solar for the full hit rerolls thing, that seems like a pretty efficient use of that buff. You don't get the wound rerolls as well because it's not core, but just the amount of guns that this can pack I think could easily make that worth it. The Warlord trait Master Tactician could allow you to redeploy a unit, really good for either hiding this or getting first turn line of sight if you need it. I feel like Night Shroud with a Psyker is quite a nice one to have alongside this. Night Shroud hands out, can't be hit on a 1 to 3, and that's really quite a nice defensive boost against any high ballistic skill enemy weapons, and the Psyker can also do another cast on top of that. Finally, repairs on an engine seer seem really nice for quite a tough tank as well. D3 wounds healed per turn or make it even more irritating to put down with that toughness 9, and you can give it a 5+ invul save with it as well. That seems pretty usable for a 40-point investment. I feel like any of those are really quite usable in supporting these. They are a unit that's big enough to justify characters hanging around them and giving them extra things, so I guess it just more depends on what you've taken and what you're buying in for the army. Now stats are a bit more confirmed, I thought it could be interesting to compare it once more to the Leman Russ. It appears that in Codex Imperial Guard, the Leman Russ tanks are 155 points base once you've included the hull-mounted weapon. So you're basically weighing up a 13 wound toughness 8 tank versus a 17 wound toughness 9 tank, but costs a lot more points. They can both equally happily take sponsons, so I'm going to compare without. And here's just some damage results that say a Leman Russ Demolisher with a las cannon would expect against some hard targets compared with the Rogal Dorn. The Demolisher tank is pretty interesting for anti-tank for the Leman Russ. The Executioner Plasma Cannon can also be pretty similarly good against the armoured targets, and maybe even a bit better against elites. In any case, when shooting against the T7 vehicle, they're pretty much equivocal. If you're firing against a hard target though, say a toughness 8 vehicle with a 5+ invul and -1 damage, the Demolisher does come out a little ahead. To be honest, the main thing that I'd take away from this is that they seem really quite balanced just on their raw stats for damage output. I think it is quite good to see that one of them isn't enormously more standout than the other one. The Executioner tank would have done slightly better against the Toughness 7 target, but worse versus the Toughness 8 one, so I guess that's a bit of a trade-off versus the Demolisher. Otherwise, on the durability side of things, this pretty much entirely depends on exactly what sort of firepower is coming at the vehicle. For anything that isn't Strength 8 or Strength 9, it's generally a victory for the Leman Russ, as the Toughness 9 doesn't matter on the Dorn tank. Just in terms of raw wounds per point, the Rogal Dorn gets slightly less per point than the Leman Russ does, and the Leman Russ has around about 25% more toughness than the Rogal Dorn against anything that isn't Strength 8 or 9. Otherwise, though, for those weapons, Strength 8 has a small win for the Rogal Dorn, as they're only wounding on 5s. It works out to be around about 20% tougher overall, which is quite nice, and there are quite a lot of Strength 8 anti-tank weapons out there, like melter guns. For Strength 9 weapons, things are kind of balanced. They're wounding the Russ on 3s, but the Dorn on 4s, but the extra wounds really more or less make up for that. It's a very tiny win for the Rogal Dorn, but not anything meaningful. Overall, again, I'd say broadly very balanced. Really kind of depends on the prevalence of Strength 8 weapons in the meta, I think. Perhaps a small win for the Leman Russ overall, though I guess that might be slightly counteracted by any unit buffs that you can put on this, such as the Dawn being a more efficient target for Night Shroud, for example. Overall, on raw stats, damage output and defense alone, it does look like the Rogal Dorn is a pretty mighty beast, easily tough enough to take on some enemy heavy anti-tank firepower and have a fair bit of it bounce off, and then backs it up with really quite a powerful heavy gun, plus a bunch of secondary weapons. I think if maybe I were to design a loadout for the tank, I'd be most likely to take the Oppressor Cannon with the Pulverizer Cannon, a whole bunch of high damage shots coming in there, plus a bonus auto cannon. You get one stopper for free. I feel like at 5 points it would be silly to turn down extra heavy bolters, and you could upgrade to multi-melters if you want to. Otherwise, I think that the front-mounted guns are probably worth the extra 5 points each. You could be firing away with 9 shots from heavy stubbers, 6 shots from heavy bolters, then the pulverizer, the oppressor cannon, and the auto cannon, and that's a really decent pile of guns for 270 points. For the tank ace traits, I'd be most tempted by the tank order or the ignore cover trait. I don't necessarily think that they're mandatory, but they seem like pretty reasonable upgrades for their cost. And then if you were to support it a bit more, then a tank commander for tank orders would give you a lot more value out of it, and a Night Shroud Psyker for defense maybe. I feel like Lord Solar is going to be really popular to include in lists, and if his rerolls aren't needed elsewhere, then they're pretty fine here as well. Overall, for a rough game plan, I feel like it's best used as a backfield gun turret for the first few turns, and then maybe being a bit more aggressive and jumping up towards objectives later. Ideally start screened or out of line of sight if possible. Could be an okay choice to hover around a home field objective and make sure that you've got something on that that's really tough. And I feel like maybe you could assess the amount of the opponent's anti-tank that they have. If they don't have anything that's going to be a massive threat to toughness 9 things, say it's low AP or strength 8, it could be a reasonable choice for playing a bit more aggressive with maybe. Make sure that this is the unit that they're going to have to try and shoot and deal with, and that's generally going to be a bad time for them with T9. Overall, from a first impression, I do feel like it could be a pretty interesting addition to the Guard battle line. Seems solidly usable, and fairly on par with the Ross, and pretty balanced. It'll be interesting to see what people wind up taking in games once they're actually out. So let me know what you think of the new Dawn tank. Look forward to hearing your thoughts and ideas down in the comments below. I will of course be hoping to get out a full review of Codex Astra Militarum in the not too distant future, so stay tuned if you'd like to see that. Finally, if you've been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked down in the video description if you're interested. The channel's Patreon page is what allows me to keep on making videos like this quite so regularly, so if you are enjoying quite a bit, any support is enormously appreciated. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early each week, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.